Birmingham didn't just erupt, it exposed something Britain has been trying to ignore. While smoke rose over the streets and sirens drowned out reason, one voice cut through the noise, sharp, direct and unforgiving. Nigel Farage didn't whisper, he slammed. And this time, the country was already listening. By the time dawn broke over Birmingham, the question was no longer what happened. It was who failed. Streets locked down, businesses shuttered, police lines stretched thin and uncertain. What began as disorder hardened into a message, broadcast without words. Britain wasn't spiralling, it was stalling. And in that silence, Farage went straight for the centre of power. This isn't leadership, he said. This is paralysis. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere. Phones lit up faster than emergency lines. The Prime Minister stayed quiet. And that quiet became the story. Starmer had promised calm through competence. What Birmingham delivered was the opposite. Confusion, delays, statements that said nothing while everything burned. Police commanders waited for orders that never came. Councils passed responsibility upward. Ministers passed blame sideways. The system didn't fall apart, it locked itself in place, and Farage named it in real time. He didn't talk policy, he talked control, or rather the absence of it. As footage poured out of Birmingham, the contrast grew sharper. Shielded officials behind closed doors, citizens facing chaos in the open. Farage accused Starmer of governing by spreadsheet, not by instinct. You can't manage a crisis you refuse to see, he said. That line hit harder than any riot baton. Millions shared it, not because they loved Farage, but because it matched what they were watching with their own eyes. Starmer finally spoke hours later. Carefully, calmly, words like isolated, contained, under review. But Birmingham wasn't listening anymore. Neither was Manchester. Or parts of London where police vans stood idle, engines running, or the odds penny. Each delay deepened the gap between authority and reality. Farage didn't need to exaggerate. The timeline did it for him. What made the moment dangerous wasn't the unrest. Britain has survived unrest before. What made it different was the reaction, or lack of one. Markets wavered, insurers hesitated, local officials admitted privately they were improvising, and Farage kept pressing the same nerve. When the public moves faster than the government, trust is already gone. That message spread faster than any official reassurance Starmer's allies called Farage. Reckless, divisive, opportunistic. But the numbers told a colder story. Engagement surged. Approval for leadership didn't. People weren't choosing sides. They were choosing clarity. And Farage was offering it in plain language. No briefings, no qualifiers. Just a blunt diagnosis of a state that had lost its grip. Birmingham became the symbol, not the cause. A pressure point where every ignored warning surfaced at once. Farage framed it as consequence, not coincidence. This is what happens when order is promised but never enforced, he said. And for many watching, it felt less like an attack and more like a verdict. By nightfall, Britain wasn't asking when calm would return. It was asking who was actually in charge. Starmer kept speaking, Farage kept cutting through. And somewhere between the two, the country felt the shift, not toward chaos, toward recognition. That control isn't declared, it's demonstrated. And in Birmingham, Britain saw the difference. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a test of authority in real time. And as the streets stayed restless and the government stayed measured, one truth settled in. When leadership hesitates, someone else fills the space. And once that happens, the crisis is no longer about order, it's about belief. As Birmingham stayed tense, the story widened. What looked like a local eruption began to feel national. Police reinforcements arrived late and left early. Command structures blurred. One senior officer admitted off record that decisions were being delayed from above. Above where, no one could say. That uncertainty was the real accelerant. Farage seized on it immediately. When no one knows who's in charge, he said, everyone pays the price. It wasn't shouted, it was stated, and that made it harder to dismiss. Starmer's response followed the familiar script: condemn the violence, praise the police, call for calm, promise review. But the country had heard those words before in different crises, from different leaders. Birmingham made them feel empty. The gap between language and reality grew wider by the hour. Footage told one story, statements told another, and people trusted what they could see. Farage framed the moment not as disorder, but as consequence. He pointed to warnings issued months earlier, intelligence reports flagged and filed away, budget increases announced but never felt on the streets. You can't govern by headline, he said, you govern by presence. That line spread fast because absence was exactly what people felt: absence of authority, absence of urgency, absence of consequence. Inside Westminster, frustration simmered. Backbench MPs privately admitted Birmingham had rattled them, not because of the scale, but because of the response, or lack of one. Meetings ran long and ended with nothing concrete. Committees debated language, while streets demanded action. Farage didn't wait for outcomes. He stayed live, reacting in real time, shaping the narrative before official channels could catch up. Starmer's allies accused him of inflaming tensions, but Farage didn't call for escalation. He called out inertia. Order isn't oppression, he said. It's the foundation of freedom. That reframing mattered. It shifted the argument away from left versus right toward control versus drift. And for many watching, it landed uncomfortably close to home. Meanwhile, signs of strain appeared everywhere. Over time, budgets ballooned. Patrol coverage thinned, local councils quietly cancelled public events, businesses boarded windows not out of fear but expectation. Birmingham felt less like an exception and more like a preview. Farage described it as a warning shot. Ignore this, he said, and you invite the next one. Starmer finally attempted to draw a line. He promised firmness, he promised reform. But timing mattered, and his words came after the moment had already passed. Leadership, once delayed, loses its weight. Farage pressed that point relentlessly. You don't restore trust by reacting, he said. You restore it by acting first. Again, simple language, hard to argue with, harder to counter. Public reaction hardened, not into rage, but into scepticism. Polls showed confidence slipping, not just in government, but in explanations. People stopped asking, what will they do, and started asking, do they even know? Farage didn't offer solutions. He offered recognition. He named what others felt, but couldn't articulate. That made him unavoidable. Birmingham remained under watch, but the psychological shift had already happened. The crisis was no longer confined to one city. It lived in the space between government promise and public belief. Farage stood firmly on one side of that divide. Starmer stood on the other, insisting control was intact while evidence suggested otherwise. By the end of the day, the argument wasn't about Farage versus Starmer. It was about credibility, about whether authority still flowed from institutions or whether it had begun to leak elsewhere. Birmingham didn't answer that question, but it forced Britain to ask it. And once asked, it couldn't be unasked.